Over time, a different, subtle body odor can appear, one that many people mistake for poor hygiene, but it is not. Understanding where it comes from is the first relief, and knowing that it could be reduced in just a few minutes completely changes the story. In a moment, I will explain how to address it better. I am Dr. Alejandro Campos, a physician dedicated to healthy habits and well-being in older adults, with 23 years of experience. I will get straight to the point. That odor many people associate with old age does not come from dirt or lack of bathing. It arises mainly from a natural process in the skin, a process that happens even if you use soap, perfume, and clean clothes. When you understand this, it changes the way you see yourself and the way you deal with it. The skin is not just a layer covering the body. It is a living barrier that produces natural oils to protect itself. These oils, which in medicine we call lipids, help keep the skin soft and shield it from the environment. The key detail is that these lipids can change in composition over time. Moreover, the skin gradually loses some of its natural ability to defend against oxidation, a chemical wear similar to what you see when you leave a piece of fruit exposed to the air. Think of a cut apple. At first it is fresh. After a few minutes without anyone touching it, it starts to change. It is not because it is dirty. It is because the air and time trigger a reaction. Something similar happens with the skin. As the years go by, certain fatty components on the skin's surface can oxidize more easily. This oxidation produces compounds with a particular odor. One of the most well-known in research is a molecule called 2-Nonenal. I do not want you to get stuck on the name. What matters is what it represents. 2-Nonenal is like a chemical fingerprint that appears when some of the skin's fats oxidize. That is why this odor can feel different from ordinary sweat smell. It is not the typical smell of an armpit after a hot day. It is an odor some people describe as stored fabric or old paper. That nuance is exactly what causes so much concern, because it feels unfamiliar and hard to manage with usual strategies. Here comes a key idea that almost no one explains. This molecule tends to mix with oil. This means it can stay attached to the skin's oily layer and also transfer easily to clothes, sheets, or the back of the chair where you spend time. That is why some people bathe and still feel like something returns. The problem is not solved just by running water over the surface. Since the origin is a chemical process in the skin's oils, the solution cannot be simply scrubbing harder or bathing more often. It has to be a different way of understanding cleansing. In a moment, I will show you why quick showers, even though they give a feeling of freshness, sometimes do not reach the real source. But first, I need you to hold on to this idea. This has nothing to do with your worth, your dignity, or whether you take care of yourself or not. When I talk with older people, many tell me the same thing in different words. They say they have become more careful than ever. They bathe early, change clothes, use lotion, and yet the doubt appears. That insecurity when sitting near someone in a waiting room, that gesture of adjusting clothes over and over, that moment when someone moves away a little and the mind goes to the worst place. I have seen how this can affect confidence, even in very strong people. That is why I want to talk about the emotional context clearly and without drama, because it is real. Many older people notice a subtle distance. It is not always open or intentional. Sometimes it is just a micro-reaction. A grandchild who hugs and lets go quickly. A child who opens a window, and although no one says anything, the heart registers it. Not because you are overly sensitive, but because when you have lived so much, you learn to read the environment with precision. That discomfort often brings shame, and shame pushes toward isolation. It starts with small things. Avoiding sitting too close, choosing the chair on the edge. Then, without realizing it, doors start closing, Plans get left behind. Spontaneity is lost. The hardest part is that this can happen even when the person is doing everything they are supposed to do. If the origin is biological, then it makes no sense for the mind to punish itself with the idea that I am failing. The harder you try with the wrong methods, the more frustration appears. The person tries perfumed soaps, washes clothes over and over, and still feels trapped in a problem no one explained properly. This becomes even more sensitive because we are people of closeness. We are about hugs, sharing meals, being together in celebrations, and also in difficult moments. That is why a topic like this hurts. Not because of vanity, it hurts because it touches connection. It touches identity. It touches the right to feel at ease next to your loved ones. Now I want you to see it from another perspective. If the molecule forms due to oxidation of fats, then there are two paths. One is to reduce the buildup of that oxidized fat on the skin. The other is to support the skin so it oxidizes less. Both paths are built with simple habits, not with shame. What comes next is not a magic promise. It is an intelligent way to understand the body with concrete and realistic steps. Before getting into that, I leave an important point. It is common that with age, the sense of smell changes. Some people perceive certain odors less, and others perceive them differently. This can create family misunderstandings. The older person feels everything is fine, and a younger family member notices something else. That clash does not mean someone is exaggerating. It means the body changes on both sides. That is why it is better to approach the topic with respect, without mockery and without labels. If you have made it this far, you have what is valuable. You know the origin is not dirt. You know there is a molecule linked to fat oxidation in the skin. You know it can stick to fabrics and persist. Now all that is left is the most practical part. It would be interesting if you tell us in the comments. After understanding that this odor does not come from hygiene, but from a natural skin process, do you feel more at ease knowing it is not your fault? Yes or no? We want to know your experience, why regular hygiene does not always solve it, and what is the most common mistake that keeps the problem alive without anyone noticing. That is where we will go next. I want to be very clear on this point, because this is where the most unnecessary guilt accumulates. For years, the idea has been repeated that the body odor appearing with age is a sign of neglect, that the person does not bathe enough, that they do not wash well, that they no longer take care of themselves like before. That belief, so deeply rooted, is profoundly unfair and wrong. Showering more does not solve it. Saying it so directly without beating around the bush can be liberating for many people, because I know men and women who bathe every day, some even more than once, and still feel the problem persists. They change soaps, try more perfumed products, scrub harder. When none of that works, the silent question that hurts appears: what am I doing wrong? From my experience supporting older people, I have seen how this hygiene myth creates enormous emotional wear. The person starts associating the odor with a personal failure, with a kind of moral decline. That is not only false, but it also makes the situation worse. Because the more you insist on strategies that do not address the real origin, the more frustration appears. The body does not work like a surface cleaned just by running water. The skin has its own chemistry. It produces natural oils, renews itself, adapts. When the odor's origin is related to an internal skin process, as we explained before, excessive washing can even work against you. Very hot water, for example, drags away protective oils. When the skin is left without that barrier, it responds by producing even more oil to compensate. It is a cycle many people do not know about. Here appears another common mistake, thinking that if something smells different, you have to cover it up. That is why so many people turn to regular deodorants, strong colognes, or heavily perfumed lotions. The problem is that these products are designed for another type of odor. They mainly act on sweat bacteria, especially in the armpits. But the odor we are talking about now does not originate there. It does not come from surface bacteria. It comes from a molecule linked to fat oxidation in the skin. That is why regular deodorants do not work on that point. Not because they are bad products, simply because they are not designed for it. It is like trying to clean a grease stain just with perfumed water. It may give a pleasant feeling for a few minutes, but it does not solve the root. When the fragrance fades, the insecurity returns. This creates another phenomenon I see often. The person starts mixing many products, soap, perfume, cream, deodorant, talc, all together. Far from helping, it creates a confusing mix of aromas that can feel even more uncomfortable. Not because the person is wrong in their intention, but because no one explained they were fighting the wrong enemy. I want you to hold on to this central idea. It is not your fault. It is not that you do not know how to stay clean. It is not that you have lost the habit. It is not that you have neglected yourself. In fact, many older people are more aware of their cleanliness today than when they were young. The problem is not in the amount of hygiene, but in the strategy. This hygiene myth also affects how the family interprets the situation. Sometimes, out of affection, someone suggests bathing more often or changing soap. Even without bad intention, that comment can feel like judgment, as if the problem were a lack of willpower. That is why changing the narrative is so important. When we understand there is a natural process behind it, the conversation becomes more respectful and less tense. From an emotional point of view, dismantling this myth is key to regaining peace. Because as long as the person believes the odor is a sign of neglect, they will live in a state of alert. They will watch every gesture from others. They will anticipate rejection. That constant anxiety ends up affecting even posture, breathing, the way they relate. The body shrinks, the presence dims, all because of a mistaken interpretation. I also want to clarify something important. I am not saying hygiene does not matter. Of course it does. Maintaining proper cleanliness is part of overall well-being, but there is a difference between basic hygiene and thinking more hygiene is always better. In this case, it is not. Compulsive showering, aggressive scrubbing, or using unsuitable products can further disrupt the skin's balance. Here comes a word I like to use a lot: body intelligence. Listening to the body, understanding how it works, adapting habits to that reality instead of fighting against it. When a person realizes the problem is not lack of cleanliness, but a different kind of cleanliness, the emotional weight drops immediately. With that, the willingness to try something new without shame appears. Before moving on, I want to make a responsible pause. Every body is different. Every skin reacts differently. That is why, with any change in routine, it is always important to do it thoughtfully and with guidance. Always consult your trusted doctor. Now, let's return to the central point. If showering more does not solve it, and regular deodorants do not act there, then it is clear we need to change the approach. Move from quantity to quality, from force to technique, from covering the odor to understanding its origin and acting accordingly. This shift in perspective often brings immediate relief, because the person stops punishing themselves, stops thinking something is wrong with them, starts seeing themselves as someone who simply had not received the right information. That alone already improves how they move through the world. Confidence begins to return even before applying any new habit. In a place where human contact is so important, recovering that confidence has enormous value. Sitting calmly in a gathering again, hugging without overthinking, sharing a closed space without discomfort. All that starts when the hygiene as blame myth falls away. Now that we have made clear what does not work, we are ready for the next step. Because once we understand the problem is not solved by bathing more or using more perfume, the logical question comes up on its own. So what can actually help? Where should attention be focused? Above all, how to do it in a simple, feasible, and body-respecting way. That is what we will talk about next. Before continuing, I want to remind everyone listening that subscribing to our channel will give you access to this vital information. Let's keep going. Now let's focus on something very specific, not broad theories or abstract explanations, but specific areas of the body where this process tends to concentrate. When we talk about the origin of that persistent odor appearing with age, we cannot think of the skin as a uniform whole. The skin does not function the same everywhere. There are areas that produce more oil, areas that get less ventilation, and areas that, without us noticing, remain outside our daily routine. The first of these areas is the upper back, particularly the region between the shoulder blades. This area has a significant density of glands that produce natural oil. That oil serves a protective function, but over time it can become the setting where compounds linked to oxidation accumulate. It is also a hard-to-reach area with the hands. Many people, even with good mobility, barely pass soap superficially and let water do the rest. The problem is that water alone does not always interact with the oily layer where the odor sticks. Another influencing factor is constant contact. The upper back stays in prolonged contact with chair backs, armchairs, car seats, and at night with the mattress and sheets. This contact helps the substances transfer to fabrics and then return to the skin. It is a silent exchange many people do not consider. It is not about visible dirt, but gradual buildup. The second key area is the nape of the neck. This zone combines several conditions that make it especially relevant. On one hand, it has natural oil production. On the other, it is usually covered by hair, which reduces ventilation. It is also an area where sweat can stay longer without evaporating. All this creates a microenvironment where certain compounds can remain active longer than desired. Many people pay attention to the hair, the scalp, using shampoo, but neglect the skin just underneath, at the base of the neck. That skin does not always receive the same care as the face or hands. Yet it is one of the first areas others notice when they get close. Not because it is dirty, but because it is a point where the body expresses these changes more evidently. The third area I want to mention is behind the ears. It is a small space, almost invisible unless you look for it consciously. There, remnants of natural oil, skin cells, and sometimes products like creams or shampoo accumulate. Being in a fold, ventilation is limited. This favors certain odors concentrating without the person noticing. What is important to understand here is that these areas are not problematic in themselves. They are not bad or dirty zones. They are simply places where the skin's physiology combined with daily routine creates particular conditions. When no one explains this, a person can spend years trying to solve the problem from the wrong place without looking where it really matters. I want to emphasize something I consider essential. We are not talking about washing harder or insisting aggressively. In fact, excessive rubbing in these areas can irritate the skin and trigger even more oil production as a response. The correct approach is to know these areas and treat them with specific attention. The difference between a shower that only refreshes and one that truly helps usually lies in those details. Many people are surprised when they understand this. They say they never thought of the upper back or nape as key points. Yet when they start observing their routine with this new information, everything fits. They understand why the odors seem to return always in the same place. They understand why the clothing on the upper body retained that aroma the most. It was not a matter of neglect. It was a matter of focus. It is also important to mention that these areas are usually covered by clothing for much of the day. Shirts, sweaters, scarves, or high collars can limit natural ventilation. This does not mean you have to avoid clothing, but it is good to be aware of how it interacts with the skin. The skin needs to breathe. When it does not, certain processes intensify. Up to here, what I want to be clear is this. The origin of the problem is not scattered randomly throughout the body. It tends to concentrate in specific areas. When we identify those areas, we stop acting blindly. We move from frustration to understanding. That mental shift is the first step for any adjustment that comes afterward. Here is a detailed English translation of the provided text, keeping the natural flow, tone, and all nuances intact without dashes, asterisks, or any formatting marks. Now I want to go a little deeper into how these areas interact with each other and with everyday habits, because they rarely act in isolation. The upper back, the nape of the neck, and the area behind the ears form a kind of upper body axis where the skin shares similar characteristics. Oil production, less ventilation, and frequent contact with surfaces and fabrics. Many people, without realizing it, clean these areas automatically, almost mechanically. The soap passes quickly, the water runs, and attention goes to other parts of the body that we traditionally associate with odor. This is not an intentional mistake. It is simply the way we learn to bathe. No one taught us to observe the skin from this angle. There is also a postural component. Over the years, some people tend to tilt their head slightly forward or hunch a little. This can increase contact between the nape and clothing, generating friction and less ventilation. It is not something done on purpose. It is part of the body's natural process, but it influences how certain odors manifest. Something similar happens behind the ears. It is an area that is rarely dried carefully after bathing. Residual moisture remains, and moisture combined with oil creates an environment conducive to certain compounds remaining active. Again, this is not about dirt, but about physical conditions. When someone understands this, they usually experience a mix of relief and surprise. Relief because they stop blaming themselves. Surprise because the explanation is simple, but no one had ever given it to them. And this is where a new question begins to open up. If we already know where the problem concentrates, what do we do with that information? The answer does not involve extreme changes or endless routines. It involves small, conscious adjustments, choosing to dedicate attention to these areas instead of distributing effort indiscriminately, changing the logic of more to the logic of better. Many people choose to dedicate a few minutes to these areas during their daily routine, not with force, but with intention. It is a different way of relating to one's own body, of observing it, understanding it, accompanying it, not fighting against it. And it is precisely from this place that the next step opens up, because once we know which are the key areas and why they matter, the focus shifts from explanation to action, not to a brusque action, but to a focused, brief, and feasible habit that can be integrated effortlessly into daily life. But first, now that you know these key areas, is there any part of your daily routine that you feel you had never observed with so much attention and that you would like to start caring for in a different way? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. After identifying where the origin of that persistent odor concentrates, the logical next step is not to do more, but to do better. This is where many people are surprised, because they expect a long or complicated routine, and what they find is something much simpler, a focused, brief, conscious habit that targets exactly the areas that really matter. Many people choose to dedicate a few minutes of their daily routine to this different approach, not as an obligation or as a fight against the body, but as an act of intelligent care. The central idea is not to scrub hard, insist, or wipe out the skin. In fact, when excessive force is used, the skin usually responds by producing more oil to protect itself, and that goes in the opposite direction of what we are looking for. The first thing that changes with this habit is attention. Instead of distributing the washing automatically across the whole body, attention is consciously directed to the upper back, the nape of the neck, and the area behind the ears. There is no need to think of it as something technical. It is more of a way of being present in that moment, of knowing what you are doing and why. When I talk about technique, I mean gentle, continuous movements without rushing. The skin responds better when treated with respect. Many people notice that when doing it this way, the skin feels clean but not tight. There is no extreme dryness sensation that sometimes appears after very aggressive showers. And that is a good sign, because it indicates that the skin's natural barrier remains intact. This habit usually integrates naturally into the usual shower. It does not require extravagant products or complex steps. What matters is that contact with those areas is not superficial, that it is not left only to the running water, that there is a clear intention to clean the layer where compounds associated with skin oxidation accumulate. Another key aspect is rhythm. It is not about speed or extreme slowness. It is about consistency. Many people discover that by repeating this approach regularly, the overall feeling of freshness lasts longer, not because the odor disappears magically, but because action is being taken on the real origin, not just on the effect. I want to insist on something I consider fundamental. This habit does not seek perfection. It does not seek immediate results or absolute guarantees. It seeks to accompany the body in a natural process. That is why language matters. We talk about supporting, favoring, helping the skin maintain its balance, not about eliminating, erasing, or eradicating something by force. Many people who adopt this approach comment that in addition to the physical change, there is an emotional change. The simple fact of knowing what they are doing and why reduces anxiety. They no longer bathe with the feeling of fighting against something inexplicable. They bathe with a different understanding of the body, and that shows in the way they move afterward, in posture, in calmness. Another important point is drying. Damp skin, especially in folds or poorly ventilated areas, can keep certain compounds active. That is why, within this habit, many people pay attention to drying the key areas well, without rubbing violently, without rushing, simply making sure the skin is dry and comfortable. In some cases, this moment is accompanied by the use of a light cream that helps keep the skin balanced. Not as a heavy layer or a strong fragrance, but as support so the skin does not feel the need to produce more oil than necessary. The idea is always the same. Technique over force, understanding over excess. It is interesting to observe how, over time, this habit stops feeling like something extra. It becomes part of the routine, like brushing your teeth or washing your hands. And when that happens, the mental effort disappears. There is no need to remember it with anxiety. It simply happens. And that naturalness is, many times, what makes the changes sustainable. I want to clarify something important from a responsible perspective. Every skin is different. There are people with more sensitive skin, others with more resistant skin. That is why any adjustment to the routine is best done while paying attention to your own sensations. If something feels uncomfortable, adjust it. If something irritates, reduce it. And in case of any doubt, it is always wise to seek a professional opinion. Always consult with your trusted doctor. This habit does not promise miracles. It does not claim to solve everything on its own. What it offers is coherence. Coherence between what we know about the origin of the problem and what we do in practice. And when there is coherence, the body usually responds better. It is also important to understand that the body needs time to adapt, not because it is slow, but because it is alive. Skin processes do not change overnight. They change when given a favorable environment in a sustained way. That is why many people describe this habit as progressive relief, a sense of control that grows with the passing days. Sometimes the greatest benefit is not only physical, it is mental. It is stopping thinking about the issue constantly. It is stopping anticipating other people's reactions. It is regaining calm in everyday situations. That is an effect that is not measured but felt, and it is usually the first sign that the approach is going in the right direction. This focused habit fulfills something very important. It returns protagonism to the person. It does not depend on expensive products or external promises. It depends on a simple understanding of the body and a feasible practice, and that, in itself, is already a form of well-being. Now, although this habit is the core of the change, it does not live in isolation. The body interacts with its environment all the time. The clothes we wear, the air we breathe, the foods we choose. Everything adds or subtracts in small percentages, and when those percentages align, the result is usually more stable. That is why, once this focused habit is incorporated, many people decide to accompany it with simple adjustments in daily life, not as an endless list, but as brief and practical supports. Before continuing, I want to remind everyone listening that subscribing to our channel will give you access to this vital information. Let's continue. Once the body begins to receive more focused care, there are small details of the everyday environment that can support that process without turning it into something complicated. It is not about changing your entire life or adding rules, but about adjusting some elements that interact with the skin every day and that often go unnoticed. One of those elements is clothing. Clothing is not just something that covers the body. It is a surface in constant contact with the skin, especially in the upper torso area. When certain substances adhere to fabrics, they can remain there even after a normal wash. That is why many people notice that some garments retain an odor more than others, even though they look clean. Here, there is no need to become obsessive. The approach is simple. Choosing fabrics that allow better ventilation is usually helpful. Natural fabrics such as cotton or linen tend to let the skin breathe more easily than very synthetic materials. This does not mean discarding all synthetic clothing, but observing how the body responds to different types of garments and prioritizing those that feel most comfortable. It is also useful to pay attention to frequency of use. Many people wear the same upper garment several times before washing it because it does not look dirty, and visually, that is true. However, some fabrics can accumulate compounds that are not always immediately noticeable. Alternating garments and allowing them to rest between uses is usually a simple way to reduce that buildup. Another important point is how clothes are washed, not from a technical perspective, but a practical one. Regular washing with good rinsing is usually sufficient. Some people choose to avoid detergents with overly intense fragrances because these can mix with other odors and create confusing sensations. A neutral or mild scent usually feels more pleasant in the long term. Bed sheets deserve a separate mention. We spend many hours in direct contact with them, especially with the upper back and nape. During the night, the body naturally releases heat and moisture. If sheets are not changed with some regularity, they can become a space where substances accumulate that then return to the skin. There is no need to exaggerate the frequency, but finding a rhythm that feels comfortable is worthwhile. Many people choose to change sheets more regularly than before, and they notice that the overall feeling of freshness improves. Here too, natural fabrics usually offer greater comfort and ventilation. Room ventilation is another simple reinforcement that is sometimes underestimated. Air circulating in closed spaces can accumulate odors over time, even when the house is clean. Opening windows for a few minutes a day allows air renewal and reduces the concentration of molecules in the environment. It is not about ventilating for hours, but allowing air to move. This gesture has a double effect. On one hand, it improves the air quality of the space. On the other, it helps fabrics like curtains, sofas, or bedding not accumulate odors persistently. Many people notice that by incorporating this habit, the environment feels lighter, more neutral. All these reinforcements share a characteristic. They do not demand extra effort or drastic changes. They are gentle adjustments that accompany the body instead of demanding from it. And when integrated naturally, they usually become part of the routine without creating mental load. In addition to the immediate environment, there is another aspect that usually accompanies these processes from a more internal place. Nutrition, not as a strict diet or a list of prohibitions, but as a way to offer the body tools that support its natural balance. When we talk about an antioxidant-focused diet, we are not talking about anything complex. It mainly involves including variety. Fruits and vegetables of different colors provide compounds that help the body better handle oxidation processes. There is no need to memorize names or exact amounts. The idea is simple. The more colorful the plate, the greater the diversity of nutrients usually present. Many people choose to incorporate fresh fruits regularly, leafy vegetables, foods that feel light to digest. Not as an obligation, but as a gradual preference. The body usually gives clear signals when something suits it well. More energy, better digestion, an overall sense of balance. It is also common for some people to reduce consumption of highly processed foods. Not out of fear, but through observation. They notice that when the diet is simpler and more natural, the body responds with greater stability. This does not imply eliminating everything they like, but finding a sustainable middle ground. Hydration accompanies this process quietly. Drinking water throughout the day helps the skin maintain its function. Well-hydrated skin usually regulates oil production better, not as a rigid rule, but as a habit that adapts to each person's sensations. Another reinforcement that often goes unnoticed is rest. Sleeping in a ventilated environment with comfortable clothing favors the body's recovery and regulation. Rest influences many internal processes, and the skin is no exception. When rest improves, many body functions find a more harmonious rhythm. These reinforcements do not act in isolation. They work as small pieces that add up. None alone makes a big difference, but together they create a more favorable environment. An environment where the skin does not have to compensate constantly, where fabrics do not accumulate excessively, where air is renewed and the body receives support from within. The most important thing of all is the attitude with which they are incorporated. Not from demand, but from care. Not from fear, but from understanding. Many people discover that when they change the way they relate to these details, the way they feel about themselves also changes. This approach allows the issue to stop occupying a central place in the mind. It becomes something integrated, managed, accompanied. And when that happens, attention is freed up for other more important things. Conversation, closeness, everyday tranquility. These brief reinforcements do not seek perfection. They seek coherence. Coherence between what the body needs and what the environment offers it. And when that coherence is sustained over time, well-being is usually felt in a more stable way, without excessive effort or unnecessary pressure. Now, if you want to keep learning, watch the next video. The content of this channel uses characters for educational and informational purposes, based on public sources, studies, and general research. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace professional medical recommendations. Every person is different. Always consult with your trusted doctor before applying any advice related to health, nutrition, supplements, or exercise.